Major funding for these broadcasts is made possible by grants from Capital One Bank and Chase Commercial Term Lending, the Witkoff Group, New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, Greenberg Traurig, Perfect Building Maintenance, Genova Burns. Additional funding is provided by grants from AKA Hotels, Corman Communities, Aerial Property Advisors, AVR Realty Company, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Bank Leumi USA, Briarwood Organization, CBRE, Citizens Bank, Colliers International NYC, CPEX Real Estate Services, Cushman & Wakefield, Customers Bank, DDG, Dime Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Fisher Brothers, First Nationwide Title Agency, Flushing Bank, Foley and Lardner, Friedman, Handler Real Estate Organization, HAP Investment Developers, Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Chairman, USRealty.com, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, Madison Realty Capital, Massey-Knackle Realty Services, Matone Group, Mercantile Commerce Bank, N.A., Meridian Capital Group, Newmark Grubb Knight Frank, Newbanks, MHP Real Estate Services, Optimum Window Manufacturing Corp., People's United Bank, Rosewood Realty Group, SJP Properties, Sterling National Bank, Sterling Risk, Stonehenge Partners, TD Bank, Terra CRG, the Continuum Company, the CUNY TV Foundation, the Moynihan Group, and these friends.
Bialystok, a place which I always grew up in Pennsylvania, Yeshiva College, Cardozo, Forest Hills, John Lennon, Yoko Ono, prosecutor office in New York City, EMS, Kever Kadisha, mayor of Englewood. I have the preeminent immigration attorneys in America, the Dean of Immigration Attorney, Leon Wildes, and his son, Michael Wildes. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure.
So, Leon, tell me about your father, Harry. How did Harry arrive in America?
Harry was born in Białystok, Poland, and came here in 1920. He was 20 years old at the time, and arrived in New York. He had some relatives here. They shortened his name to Wildes immediately because an older brother had that name. And he started working in the Lower East Side until he was introduced to my mother.
As we would say, it was a arranged marriage. A shidduch, and your mother was in Pennsylvania.
Right.
In Scranton, correct?
In Scranton. And the rabbi of the Bialystoker Shul in New York was a cousin of hers and had previously served as rabbi in Scranton. So he made the introduction.
Now, your mother's family came over like in the 1800s over there in Scranton, and as I was reading in the history of the towns, Scranton, you know, the businesses, the merchants were the Jews over there and the professionals, and the son-in-law moves to Scranton, Pennsylvania, and in the tradition of the family, her father let each family member run a retail store.
That's correct, in one of the surrounding little towns. And my father was set up. They called the suppliers and got credit for him, and they set him up in a store in Oliphant.
So in Oliphant, Pennsylvania, this town where they had a very small shul or a synagogue, you know, where your father was involved with that, and your mother and father have two sons. your
Yes.
older brother, who becomes a physician, and you. Tell me about growing up in a small Pennsylvania town.
Well, first of all, I was the only Jewish kid in the school. My graduating class was 100, and I was the only Jewish kid. My brother, the same thing for his year. And that was the public school. There was also a Catholic school. So we were in a super minority there, and and all the Jewish families, I think, were involved in some kind of a business or other. The only industry in Oliphant was coal mining.
And basically, the retail store was there to take care of the coal miners, to provide them, clothing, and it was a hard goods type of operation over there.
And use of the Russian, Polish, and Ukrainian languages was very important.
Yeah, I remember reading that your dad spoke about 5 languages.
Yeah, but all of those Slavic languages he was fluent in. And as a result, he had access to the clientele who would come to the store to buy something.
Now, when you're in Oliphant, you really never had an idea that you were going to become a lawyer. And in a way, you were going to follow the tradition of your brother and go to St. Thomas Aquinas, right?
That's right. Everybody attended the University of Scranton, which was a good Jesuit school. They recognized our religious holidays and permitted us to be absent and so on. And it was the local school to prepare all future professionals in that area. Except that one day my father's brother-in-law got a call, who called my father. It was a Thursday night, and classes were to have started in St. Thomas Aquinas University on Monday morning. And he said, "Are you going to send your second boy also there to the Catholic school?" Well, my father said, "Listen, my boys they're not yeshiva boys, they have to learn a profession, and I have no business to give them, so they'll have to go to college and then go to a professional school." Well, his brother-in-law said, "My boys also go to a college, but it's a yeshiva college, and they study religious subjects, and they also study everything else to become professionals." My father said, "I never heard of such a school." Well, by Sunday night, we had decided, we got a letter of reference from a rabbi in Scranton, and we were on a train 2 o'clock in the morning to go to New York to see what this yeshiva college was all about. And classes were to have started at Yeshiva College also the next day. And when we arrived there, we were interviewed, except that they weren't ready the classes were already formed. And I didn't have the kind of yeshiva background that the other boys who had studied in yeshivas all their lives had. So it took a little time until we were able to work it out. But when I came home from New York, I told my parents I would like to go there.
Now, what's interesting is that many of the people who were at Yeshiva College then and Yeshiva University today are on scholarships. And they were going to give you a partial scholarship, but your father said, "You don't."
One day I took him by the bursar's office and showed him the form, the scholarship application. All the boys were on scholarship, it seemed to me. And I said, "You'll just attach your tax return to this for last year, and they won't charge me tuition." And he absolutely refused. He banged his hand on the table in the bursar's office and said, "We don't accept contributions."
how do you decide that you wanted to be a lawyer? Your brother was going to medical school. How do you decide that you...
Well, I always had an interest in law, but I also was thinking that perhaps I should become a rabbi, and those were my choices. What made up my mind was the fact that after taking the exams and so on, I was offered a tuition scholarship
At NYU.
NYU Law School.
So you're at NYU Law School, and then after that, from NYU Law School, you have the opportunity to go. You wanted to go for your master's, and you went for your master's in a business which, when you were starting out, was not really a field of major business. Immigration was a small little practice.
Actually, there wasn't even a course given in law school in immigration law, but I took a course in the graduate law school, which was in the field. It was a beginner's kind of course, and I became so enamored with the work and seemed to do so well with it. It seemed to be my field that I took it up immediately.
So what happens next is you get involved and you get a job with HIAS, the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society. And let's talk about HIAS.
HIAS was a great opportunity. When I was in the law school, I saw a notice on the bulletin board that HIAS was looking for someone who spoke Yiddish or Hebrew, and I was fluent in both. So I applied and got the job, and that was my first work in the immigration field.
So you spend a year at HIAS, and then with one of your professors or friends, Mr. Fields or
Elmer Freed.
Elmer Freed.
Yeah.
You come to a building that you've been at since 1960, 515 Madison Avenue, and you open up a law practice. And then one day you get a phone call from a business agent or a friend to tell you that he needs you to handle a case for this musician who you never heard of.
Yeah, Professor Freed was my professor of immigration law in the graduate school, and he offered to join me to open offices together. And then we moved to 515 Madison Avenue, where I have been for an enormously long time. I think it's about 50 years now. And while I was in my practice, which was strictly immigration law, I got a call from a former law school friend who used to practice in my building, who had become counsel to Apple Records, the musical producer of the Beatles music. He said, "Leon, if you would like to come with me, we could go. I'm going later today to see John Lennon and Yoko Ono. They are super important clients." I said, "Forgive me, who is John Lennon and Yoko Ono?" I had never heard of them. So we went there so that I would be introduced, and that night they actually retained me to represent them.
There was a double representation. She came here because her daughter had been taken away by the father, and she wanted to have custody and visitation. The other situation that was John was to be thrown out of America because he had the cannabis resin on his hand. And so this was a matter of, this was a time that Nixon and Haldeman and all the rest really were against you.
Well, I didn't learn that yet, but...
You were too naive at that time. Right?
Yeah, completely. And when I was retained, I went in and asked the district director of immigration in New York, who was a good friend of mine, whether I could get a 6-month extension for them for a very, very humanitarian cause, and that was to reunite Yoko with her child of age 8, who she hadn't seen for several years because her former husband had been hiding the child out. And she had been traveling with John through Europe, chasing them around, and couldn't ever locate them. So they had come to the United States and started a custody proceeding. And they were beginning to get a court order benefiting them. They had a temporary order at the time. So it was a real humanitarian reason for an extension. About the next day, the district director of immigration calls me back and says, "Leon, because it's you, you're going to get a month. But otherwise, the atmosphere in Washington is not good for these people, and get them out of the United States."
Right. So basically, it took the next 4 years of your life, okay, and you took care of a precedent in this deferred action situation. You got Yoko permanent residence first. You were able to get John to remain over here. Now we fast forward over here because your father is this big immigration attorney, and he's also teaching at Cardozo at this time, and he has 3 boys.
2 boys.
2 boys, and you're the oldest, right? So your father is practicing at 515 Madison Avenue, and you're living in Forest Hills, right?
I'm growing up in a household with a legend in our field, and somebody that I hold in personal adulation. The enamoration my father had with the law is the enamoration that I had to be with my father. I just turned 50, and we've been paying rent 49 years in that building, and I have clear memories going with him on a Sunday with these tinfoil kosher sandwiches my mother made, cutting scrap paper all day, and if I was a good boy, I'd get a big law book on my shelf at home in Forest Hills. And it was a real privilege to see Dad in action then and now, because the persona and the way he is to you is how he was to John and Yoko, is the way he is to his children, the way he is to everything that's important.
Now, when you were growing up, you know, we talk about you loved to read. You read the Hardy Boys. You were under the sheets. You had the flashlight. You would do that. But you know, you always wanted to be involved with community service. I mean, that you got involved at a very young age in the burial society called the Kever Kadisha. How do you get involved with that?
I was 14. I grew up in Forest Hills, Queens, and a dear friend of my grandparents had passed away, somebody who also was able to have refuge in this nation from the Holocaust. And I had just learned some of the ritual and rites in preserving somebody who passes on the Sabbath. And I volunteered at a tender age to walk over to the home. And it was an epiphany for me at a very young age to see somebody who had passed who was so close to my family. And I remember the gift that I appreciated then of life and service, and that it was a small snapshot in time, and that we had to make it meaningful for those around us and those that we could help.
Right, but you had gone originally to school in Queens and then in Riverdale, right?
Yeah, it was a yeshiva high school in Riverdale, then to Queens College, but I was able to finagle or manage to work at Dad's shop 3 days out of the 5 and go to school 8 in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, all 4 years, so that I was able to concentrate on my older brother, the firm.
Right, so the older brother of the firm, that's why I said there were 3.
That's right.
Okay, it was the firm, it was you, and then
right.
your brother. Okay. So what happens over here is you go to Queens College, and during that time, then you said, hey, look, you know, I did the Kever Kadisha, now let me do EMT, right?
No, that's Hatzalah.
Hatzalah later on, okay.
Service.
But
I joined the NYPD.
The NYPD auxiliary, where we have a picture of you. So what were you doing with that?
I had this insatiable curiosity as I was reading and getting older to realize that with a stroke of a pen, an elected official could help manage or govern the lives of millions of people. I had seen it firsthand in those beautiful passports that I have framed in my home now in New Jersey with J's on them, or the name Israel or Sarah for men and women.
From your
just to remind people that we had safety in this country, and you had to pay it forward. I donned a uniform and I had a yarmulke that said Officer Mike, not to show people of non-Jewish faith that I was a proud Jew, but to show Jews that you could be involved in public service and be an observant person at the same time. And I did that for many years and had the good fortune then, having met my wife in my dad's class at Cardozo Law School, to then join the
But you really got involved with politics when you were working for Gary Ackerman and Geraldine Ferrera.
1984,
in Queens.
I was 20 years old, and unlike most of my friends that were going to summer camp, I opted to work on the Hill for Geraldine Ferraro and Gary Ackerman, stalwarts of the Democratic Party, and I got a little bit of that in my DNA, how special a privilege it was to work on Capitol Hill.
So then you go to Cardozo. You have your father as your teacher, okay, in the class of the immigration, which you have taken over later on subsequently, and you graduate Cardozo, and then you decide to become a prosecutor.
I had this mixed brand. Was I going to get involved in law or public service? And it seemed that the U.S. Attorney's Office was an opportunity to do both. You didn't make a lot of money, but you got up early and you stayed there late, and you were removing drugsters and mobsters and all the bad people from this nation. And I learned immigration from a different vantage point. I had seen it growing up with Dad on the way into the city, and I would make lists of all the things that were important for him to do that day. And then I would read his articles against the position of the government that I was representing at the time, and people would say, "Are you related to this Wildes guy?" I said, "Yeah, I get that a lot." And I had the privilege then of learning immigration from the vantage point as a prosecutor.
That's when you got involved with Hatzolah?
Yeah, so my daughter was going to be born, Raquel, and I had grown up with a brother, and they don't come with instructions, so I figured I'd better learn how to protect and serve my own home, having been involved in police authority.
So now, as we would say, there were three brothers, the law practice being one, you and then your brother Mark, okay?
My brother's a rabbi.
Right, who also followed in the tradition of Cardozo.
Yeah.
And who subsequently, established with the help of you and your dad the Manhattan Jewish Experience when he became a rabbi, which is probably one of the greatest programs which was started on the West Side that's, transitioning and making sure that the faith is continued on. So how do you let him become a mayor of the town of Englewood?
He was busy.
He was busy. He had too many cases, right.
I still had the bug, and my wife had negotiated after my mom passed away that we moved to New Jersey, and I got involved with a couple of the local lawyers and saw public service again as something that could be effectuated on a part-time basis. So by day, I was a lawyer on Madison Avenue under Dad's arm, and in the evenings, I was listening to shuls and pools and all kinds of variances and challenges. Became a city councilman.
And wearing out shoes also.
Yeah, city councilman for 2 terms, knocking on doors, and then I got elected twice as mayor of Englewood.
Yeah, but besides being elected, you and Dad over the years, have handled, in addition to the Lenin matter, many other cases. I mean, there was the case that you handled with the person who stopped the bomber on
the shoe bomber.
On the shoe bomber.
Yeah. So we've had I was torn when I left the government. There were a lot of bad people in this nation, and that kind of ethical consideration that you have found itself comfortably in our office, where we were able to effectively protect people in harm's way who would turn state's evidence against other people. I had the privilege of testifying in Capitol Hill in 1999 in support of anti-terrorism legislation, because we saw ways that foreign nationals were able to bootstrap themselves on U.S. soil, students, diplomats, clerics, who did not have the authority to be here. And we saw that there was a path without fee to actually help whistleblowers and defectors and cooperators on the war on terrorism, not realizing that it had begun in 1979, and to this date, decades later, it's still being fought.
Now, in addition to those cases, I mean, you represented a number of years ago Miss Universe, the soccer great Pele, getting him so he could be working with the Cosmos, the world-renowned Jean-Georges. But the practice continues to be, in today, one of the biggest items that's been written up in the newspaper are this EB-5s, the immigration on that situation, which your father was definitely involved with the legislation going back on the EB-5s. Immigration, as I was saying earlier in the broadcast, when Dad went into it, it was nothing. Maybe there were 400 immigration attorneys in the country. Today we have 14,000.
Amazing. Dad was president of the association in '71 when there were, like you said, 400 lawyers. There are 14,000. We've had the great privilege in all those years to represent everybody from housekeepers to rock stars, and you wouldn't know, speaking to any one of us, who's on the other end of the telephone and what the fee is, because it's all project-based, what people can afford. And most of our clients, mind you, we haven't even met with
now,
Skypes and electronics.
Well, speaking of that, something that I didn't say, but I'll bring it out now. So when your dad meets John Lennon and Yoko Ono, you and your dad are observant Jews, and you say to him, you can't make phone calls. You can't call me over there
Remember grossing
on Shabbos.
When I was first retained, the first thing Yoko asked me was, can I have your home phone number? I said, yes, but there's a rule that attaches to it. I don't answer the phone Friday night to Saturday night. Oh, she said, I know about that. That's no problem.
Okay. So now let's talk about the next generation, okay? We got two generations in the law office. There may be a third generation.
We're prayerful.
Okay, your daughter who recently graduated.
My daughter graduated Columbia University.
Her name is
Raquel, and she's going to be going, God willing, to Columbia School of Journalism for a master's and then off to law school.
Which she may follow the tradition of the Cardozo situation.
Her grandfather's working on that one.
Right.
I have a son, Josh, who's now at Yeshiva University, who took the law school admission test yesterday and has expressed and articulated an interest in cutting scrap paper on weekends. And then I have two drama queens, Lauren Ruth, named after my mother, who is at Barnard, and Jacqueline, who's at Ramaz. All of them have grown up in a household where their mother, who's really, I think, the most effective lawyer between anybody we have in our law firm, an extraordinary example of what a good Jewess, a good lawyer, and a good American is.
So, it's interesting for the kid who grew up in Oliphant, Pennsylvania, who has truly become the immigration world-renowned leader, his son following the tradition, another wonderful son practicing, doing great work at the Manhattan Jewish Experience, and definitely there's going to be a third generation in the firm, and I'm so happy that you're here today. Thanks for being here.
Such a treat for us to be here, too. Thank you.